first political viewpoints I could ever articulate with some kind of logic was my general opposition to military interventionism. I grew up hearing about the Iraq and Afghanistan wars on the news, and the more I learned about these conflicts as I got older, the more frustrated I was that they had grown up with me. I saw in them a ridiculous geopolitical quagmire that cost an immoral amount of blood and treasure and didn't seem to have any lasting benefit. Under the circumstances, it probably would have been more surprising if I hadn't fallen on the side of non-interventionism. Now, my nerd friends know I hold this position, and how strongly I feel about it, which is why it was so surprising to some of them that one of the foreign policy decisions I was most critical of the Trump administration for was when they pulled out of northern Syria, and subsequently abandoned the Kurds, one of our longtime allies in the area. Some of them thought it was weird and kind of hypocritical for someone who was so usually opposed to military intervention to have supported it here. And I think that that's a fair point to raise. So I thought it might be fruitful to sit down and detail 3 ways someone could potentially get me to support the use of the military in a foreign conflict. Now, none of these will guarantee my support, but they are prerequisites for me to even consider it. Because while I am fairly confident that I'm largely correct in my wider philosophy behind the use of military force, there can be exceptions. And we're going to list them right now, and I will go ahead and try to be brief. Alright, exception number 1. There being a clear and present danger. This is more than just a Harrison Ford movie. It is a very legitimate reason to use military force. I think it's the most obvious one I could bring up. To give an example of more what I'm talking about, if, say, North Korea got uppity and just straight up nuked Busan or Seattle, the time will be over for a diplomatic solution. Declaring war and invading would not be an unreasonable response to such aggression. In fact, it wouldn't even be immoral. Now, hear me, that does not give us license to commit war crimes or to irradiate the northern half of the Korean peninsula, but it is perfectly just to use a nation's military in self-defense or in defense of an ally. And a situation like that would absolutely go in that bucket. Don't misunderstand me, though. The danger needs to not only be present, it needs to also be clear. Super clear, in fact. Ideally, the reason behind military action needs to not only be understood by nerds and kind of nerds, but also those who think a filibuster is a type of breakfast burrito. If you're going to engage in an action that could potentially kill thousands of people and cost trillions of dollars, the general public has every right to have full understanding as to why it's taking place. It cannot be hidden behind classified intelligence findings that we'll never get to see. There is no circumstance where I plan on taking the CIA's word for it. That's just never going to happen. Alright, let's move on to exception number 2, when a military intervention is bilateral. Now, I don't have too much to say about this point because it's pretty straightforward. Engaging militarily through an international coalition is so much more preferable than going in all by yourself. Not only does it mean that your logistical and financial needs will be shared among many nations, it's not just up to you to break your wallet trying to pay for everything, but I also am of the mind that it'll keep the engagement a little more pure in its motivations. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. I love history. I love researching history, and what I've observed in the stories of yore is that when a country unilaterally uses its military somewhere, it tends to more often than not be for their own geopolitical interests, and when that's the case, things can spiral into the land of unethical very fast. So if you have a legitimate reason to go to war with someone, they just bombed your capital and killed a bunch of civilians, it's a legitimate reason, I'd still recommend not going alone. Make some friends and have them go fight with you. It'll be better for everybody involved. Alright, let's move on to the third and final exception, when the military intervention is being used to accomplish a simple task. Let's return to the Kurds and go deeper into why I thought it was so egregious that Trump abandoned them. What makes that different from, say, the Afghanistan war, an intervention that I strongly oppose and would like ended as soon as possible? The answer to that is actually pretty simple, and it lies in the nature of the two operations. Remember, I consider the Afghanistan war a disaster because the US government has been trying and failing to implement a Madisonian-style democracy in a ridiculously complex nation that only exists because of competition between the British and Russian empires decades and decades ago, We are attempting to nation build in a region with the nickname Graveyard of Empires. It is a hopeless endeavor, and we have tried and failed for 20 years, and we need to take lessons away from that. And we need to stop attempting to fix something that isn't going to stop being broken, at least in the way that we keep trying to fix it. So, was the same kind of thing happening in northern Syria? Were we in a complex geopolitical quagmire where we were trying to fix a nation that should never have even existed? Were we trying to build something from the ground up? Nope, not even a little bit. That's not what we were doing there at all. In fact, in northern Syria, we were basically just standing there. And we were standing there to keep one of our close allies in the region, Turkey, from just laying waste to another one of our close allies in the region, the Kurds. Now, I don't have time to go over the complex history between Turkey and the Kurdish people. I'll leave there's a good video from Ultimate History Hub that I'll leave in the description. But all you really need to know for the purposes of this video is that the situation I'm referring to is one where the mere existence of American troops kept the region in a stable peace. Now, normally I roll my eyes to arguments like that. I don't tend to find them convincing when I consider facts on the ground. But a broken clock is right twice a day, and this is one of those times where that was basically just absolutely the case. We weren't nation building, we weren't propping up a dictatorship, we weren't even fighting anyone anymore. Our presence there simply prevented Turkey from attacking the Kurds for fear of accidentally harming Americans and causing a massive international incident. It really was as simple as that, which is a rarity in the world of foreign policy. Now, all of this to say, like I said, these are certainly the exceptions to my general rule of non-interventionism. I prefer not to use the military in foreign conflicts. I prefer not to get involved in conflicts around the world. I think George Washington was right to warn against foreign entanglements, and I think the last 20 years of American foreign policy show just how wise of a sentiment that was. But, only a Sith deals in absolutes, and I'm not a Sith Lord, and the realm of foreign policy is never as black and white as one might wish it be, because that's just not how the world works. And that's why I pray for those in power to exercise caution when utilizing our military forces in foreign affairs. And I pray that they think very, very carefully before making such decisions, even if they generally agree with me on the topic of military intervention.